Boop boop ba boom ba dum bum. Boop boop ba boom ba dum ba da dum da dum. Doo doo da boom ba dum bum. Beep ba boop ba boop ba boop da ba dum bum. Beep ba boop ba boop beep boop ba ba dum bum. Hello, friends and guests. Welcome to reasonandbalance.com. I'm David Lentz. Here continuing with some videos trying to help folks understand the economy and why the job situation and the health of the economy is what it is. Today we're going to talk about fiscal policy, the economic health of the country, which is evidenced by gross domestic product, GDP, and of course we're going to talk a little bit about jobs. Okay, we're going to talk today about fiscal policy. The basic health of the economy is determined basically by, I've got three basic categories here: fiscal policy, monetary policy, and global factors. We're going to talk about number one today, and it's fiscal policy, which is the taxing and spending policy. And we're going to talk basically about the federal government. Of course, the taxing and spending policy of the federal government has to work in conjunction with the monetary policy and the money supply, which is basically set by the Federal Reserve Bank. We're going to discuss that in a separate video, and we'll talk about global factors in another video as well. Going back to fiscal policy, naturally, the House and Senate have to agree on a budget, and then they have to agree to appropriate money to things like defense spending. That's a biggie. Entitlements, Social Security, healthcare, housing, and various other categories of federal spending. How that money is appropriated and how much money is appropriated, government spending, has a big effect on G, and we'll talk about G over here, which is government spending, in a second. The tax policy has effects because how much consumers net after taxes is going to have an effect on C, which is consumer spending. We're going to talk about that in a second. And for example, like if you have investment tax credits and things like that, the tax policy would affect something like I, which is investment spending. So the fiscal policy has a myriad of effects on something called AD, which is aggregate demand. AD, aggregate demand. And we're going to talk about demand. The level of the economy is set by the overall aggregate demand in the economy by its citizens and its businesses for goods and services. How much demand is there? How much demand there is for goods and services in the economy is one element that determines the health of the overall American economy. It's one aspect that sets GDP, gross domestic product. Okay. The aggregate demand formula, which I've got up here on the board, AD equals consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports, which is exports minus imports, the net figure NX. NX, oddly enough, can be a negative number, and it can subtract from these other three elements. As a matter of fact, we have a trade imbalance right now, and NX actually is, I believe, a negative number right now. But anyway, so this is basically one half of the equation that goes into determining the health of the economy. I don't know how many of you folks out there have had economics, but basically those that have, I'll simply explain, and for those who haven't had it, I'll try to make this very simple. This is what a typical demand curve looks like for any good or service. This could be the demand for socks, or for computers, or for oranges, or for anything. Normally, as price goes up, P is price. As price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. So as quantity, the lower the price goes, the more you sell. So if the price is up here, you only sell this much. But if the price is down here, a lower price, this is price high, this is price low, you're going to sell this much. So this is quantity a lot, and this is quantity little, okay? So obviously as the price goes down, you sell more. If the price goes up, you sell less. This is basically fundamental to all economics right there, a typical demand curve. The actual amount bought or sold is determined not only demand, but also by supply. And supply curves come through here like this, and whatever the supply is, supply operates just the opposite, just the entire opposite of demand. If prices go down, more is going to be bought. If prices go up, sellers want to sell more and they'll produce more because they're getting higher and higher prices, potentially bigger and bigger profits. So a supply curve, this is supply 1, and this is supply 2. Supply curves are upward sloping, not downward sloping. They're just the opposite, and it creates this X effect. And where the supply curve and the demand curve intersect determines the amount that actually is bought or sold, okay? So that's how that operates on a micro level. Well, on the U.S. economy level as a whole, it acts exactly the same way. Now here's a supply curve. I've taken one of these. This is the aggregate supply curve, but this is now for the whole economy. And you'll notice it creeps up. It's like this generally, but it's kind of flat and it kind of hooks up. At the very end, it starts to get steeper and steeper until it's practically vertical, like this. And this upward hook is very important, very, very important, because it has very important ramifications. And why does it slope upward like this? Well, this comes down to the definition that as prices go up, suppliers want to provide more and more and more. However, at some point, everybody is employed and factories are operating at maximum capacity and they can't produce anymore. At that point, if the demand is high enough and people just want more and more and more and more and more is demanded, suppliers, producers will ask for higher and higher prices because they can get it, because people have gone crazy with demand. And at that point, everybody's been hired, factories at full capacity, they can't produce anymore, so they will charge $1 million per unit, or whatever price. And that's why at the end it gets steep and goes vertical, okay? This is a very important point. Okay, so this is the aggregate demand curve. And as we can see, it's relatively flat, it starts to get a little steep, and and it's going straight up. Okay, all right. So the question is, a really important question in economics, and it's very controversial right now, is what is full employment? The benchmark has always been something probably a little bit less than 5, or a little bit less than 5%. Why is that? It's because, for example, if you take a new student who's just recently graduated from college, he's looking for a job, okay? Some people don't like their jobs, they just leave their jobs voluntarily, okay? You have those people. Then you have people who's, for example, when IBM was selling mainframe computers, all of a sudden there was no demand for mainframe computers, and the people that were experts at building and programming mainframe computers all of a sudden couldn't get jobs. Those people were maybe perhaps structurally unemployed, couldn't find jobs in the PC market. Some people are unemployed because their jobs are all obsolete, like my mainframe computer guy. Some people are unemployed because of recessions, which are temporary, not caused by technological change. Structural unemployment is or things that are, by and large, you've got companies that are obsolete. And then you've got cyclical unemployment because of business cycles. But you can't solve the voluntary unemployment. People are just going to leave jobs voluntarily every now and then because they just get tired. They want a change. They want to go back to school. They want to be a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad. Economists basically have come up with these people are always going to be unemployed, and so realistically, if you look at the unemployment figures, that doesn't really tell you whether the economy is at full employment. So they realize it's something less than 100%. So they've come up with this figure. Now, whether that's valid or not is subject to debate, and how you count that, the people that are out of the workforce that have given up, how do you count people that are unemployed that have taken part-time jobs that were formerly making $80,000 or $90,000 a year, and all of a sudden they're making $20,000 a year. How do you count all that in? Very important subjects, sort of beyond our scope right now, but we're going to take like about 5%. Okay, we're saying that that's full employment. Okay, like I said, you have aggregate demand, aggregate supply. That's what I've got right here. Here's our supply curve right here. And we see it right about here hooking up and right here. And this happens to be, in my example here, where it crosses an aggregate demand line. And I've got aggregate demand F to mean aggregate demand at full employment. That's ADF right there, full employment. And this is the price level, GDP, this is GDP, the level of goods and services, Q, in the entire that's the quantity of goods and services in the entire economy, right here. Now here's the thing. This is the aggregate demand curve, this is the aggregate supply curve for the entire economy, all goods and services in the economy. So this is the price level of full employment, and this is GDP right here. How much activity, how much purchasing and exchange of goods and services is going on in the economy, and how, and this is when the economy is at basically 5% unemployment. Okay, now, let's go back to our formula here. Aggregate demand, which is this curve right here, right? Or it's this curve right here. Or it's this curve right here, right? As government spending right here increases, this goes up. That causes aggregate demand to go up. When you have an increase in G because of an increase in government spending, it shifts the demand curve. If we were below, this is under full employment, ADU. If you increase, when you're under full employment and you increase government spending, it pushes out to full employment. You could push government spending out so far that you're up here, which would be very inflationary, as you can see. By the same token, if you decrease government spending, it pushes the aggregate demand curve down. And then you are going to have, well, for example, you could go from here, which is here, to here, or full employment back to here. The point that I'm trying to make is changes in government spending, the fiscal policy of the U.S. government that the House, the Senate, and the President have to basically agree on. And they have to cooperate. And this is why it's so important for politicians to be able to cooperate. Because they have to come up with, the taxing and spending policy of the United States, because it shifts this stuff and it has an effect on unemployment. But the point that I'm making is that as G increases, because government spending increases, it shifts the demand curve. It can shift it this way. And yesterday, the Federal Reserve apparently determined although this gets to the issue of monetary policy, which is a different discussion, that we were already at full employment and they were afraid we were going to get into an inflationary spiral with huge price increases. If you have huge price increases, people then begin to have less discretionary spending. They can't go to Walmart or buy new cars or things like that, and that begins to have trickling effects. People start then having to lay off workers because people don't have enough cash to spend. But this is what happens here. Now the same thing would happen on the tax side. If you had a tax decrease, consumer spending would theoretically go up. And if you allocated the tax code, made the correct provisions in the tax code, you may be able to increase investment spending. But this is how this affects. This is how government spending affects the economy, how it affects the level of prices, and Q reflects the health of the economy. The further out this way you are, the healthier the economy is. The further in this way you are, the less healthy the economy is. But the point that I'm making is that in full employment right here, if you go beyond full employment, and we can argue about the 5% unemployment figure, but if you go beyond full employment, all of a sudden you start to have huge price increases with no real with very little, there's still going to be a tiny amount, very little improvement in the job situation or in the total output of the country. And I hope, like I said, you can be anywhere on the scale with the aggregate demand curve, but this is what happens when government, you have a shift this to the left, regardless of where you are, if government spending goes down, and a shift out if you have more government spending. Now, of course, if you have lots of government spending, the problem is you've got to collect taxes, and that may decrease that, and it may decrease that. And this is usually the conservative view, that too much of this causes problems over here, and then you have problems with a huge federal deficit, and all of a sudden you're having to borrow a lot of money, which requires interest payments in the future, which would have the effect of basically you get to the point where you can't spend much money on government spending because you're paying so much in interest for the money you've borrowed. But anyway, this is how the government spending and how all of this interreacts, and why you can't just have unlimited amounts of government spending. We'll further elaborate on some of the questions that you may have when we get to monetary policy, because it's an important consideration that also has an effect on all this, particularly investment spending. And monetary policy also is probably going to affect this, because it's going to affect exchange rates, how much the dollar is worth versus other currencies like the euro. So in any event, I hope that this has sort of made some things clearer for you. My name is David Lentz, and thanks for visiting reasonandbalance.com. See you next time. Boop boop ba boom ba dum bum. Boop boop ba boom ba dum ba da dum da dum. Boop boop da boom ba dum bum. Beep ba boop ba boop ba boop da ba dum bum. Beep ba boop ba boop ba boop ba dum bum.